Well, welcome everybody. It's David Leis here, your proud host of Leaders on the Frontier. It's July 17, 2025, the year of our Lord, and I hope everyone is doing well. We're so honored that you could join us. You know, it's interesting, history does matter, and one of the things I love is Canadian history. It's fascinating. On July 17, this day, years ago in what year was it? 1683, if memory serves me correctly. Count Frontenac held a peace conference with the Iroquois nation at Cataraqui, and so I think a year later they acted a little bit of a landmark. Today we've passed the 10,000 subscriber mark when it comes to leaders. So that's a significant following. And it's amazing the thousands of comments. We get several million views every month here on Leaders. And so this is all part of that. So a huge thank you. And we get lots of comments. This was such an informative listen. Thank you. So thank you, Sherry. Thank you so much for sharing your story, Georgianne. This was in relationship to our guest last week, Georgianne Burke. I'm so glad to hear your story and know that I'm not the only one that feels this way, being only 42. So thank you for your comments. They really do matter, and we do try to read them. We can't respond to all of them, a few thousand comments every month, but it really is very touching. So thank you very much. It's interesting. Foam Fatel says, always nice to catch a show live. Thank you as always, Mr. Leis, for all your wonderful shows. Well, thank you very much. I assume that's not your real name, but we do really appreciate that comment. Very thoughtful. Our country matters, and so that's part of the following we have, and engagement. And to me, I get a lot of hope for our country because I see in our audience a lot of people who care. They comment, they engage, and I think that's a reflection of the kind of people that you are. So bravo on you. So there's a lot of things happening in the news today before we dive into our topic about Aboriginal land acknowledgements. And I think you'll find this a fascinating discussion. We've got an incredible panel lined up to thoughtfully look at this issue. But today, I believe there's a summit today with Aboriginal leaders with the Prime Minister, Mark Carney. And of course, they're talking a lot about, I believe, different major policy issues, including so-called Bill C5 regarding how does the federal government help get this economy moving with the provinces as they look at defining projects of, quote, national interest. And so how do they work with First Nations across the country to get things going? We all know that we want to move prosperity forward. And in the meantime, we've got, of course, a relatively new prime minister who's moving that agenda forward. I know that it's been revealed last week that the Prime Minister, Mark Carney, has a lot of different commercial interests. So it's a very interesting issue. How do you govern well in light of those interests? So that's a story that's unfolding. Kind of a sad story in Ottawa. I don't know if you've been to it, but there's the National Holocaust Monument. There was an act of vandalism the other week that indicated anti-Semitism, and it's just kind of a tragedy where things were scrolled across the monument as obviously a sign of disrespect. Very sad news. So police are investigating that. And also, speaking of crime, it's interesting. A major Surrey gangster in British Columbia allegedly has moved huge volumes of drug precursors for a whole series of gangs, not just around Canada, but around the world. Go figure. So that arrest just took place in Nevada, and the man was charged for smuggling for a notorious set of gangs, including an Irish gang, no less. And that person is from Surrey, BC. We also have some very interesting polls, and I also take polls with a grain of salt, as I hope you do. But we have some polls regarding Canadians' perspective on reducing trade barriers. So I want to bring that up, Madam Producer. We've got Canadians believe reducing provincial trade barriers will promote growth. So that's interesting that many Canadians, you can see them across the country, they are catching the vision, the importance of public policy as it relates to having what is it again? Oh, yeah, free trade in Canada. And depending on the estimate, that could benefit Canadians big time, thousands of dollars for each Canadian, or 3 to 5% of our GDP. That's a lot of money. So there was a July 1 deadline set for free trade in this country. There's been a lot of good work done between provinces, but unfortunately, we still don't have free trade as of July 1st. We've missed the deadline, but we're working on it. And that was incidentally the vision of founding this country when Sir John A. and so many other founders came together and said, we can do better. We can come together as colonies, as a confederation, and we can work together to create an incredible nation in this part of North America. So go figure. There's another poll. It says, in terms of Canadians' perspective on this whole Bill C5, that is expediting national projects, and that poll also indicates, a significant number want to see that happen, but they're a little bit unsure, maybe neutral. Some are even concerned about, quote, rushing large-scale projects. So again, I take that with a grain of salt. So people are just kind of trying to figure that out. So what do you think? Curious what you think about those issues. And so that brings us to our next topic, which has to do with the whole issue of Aboriginal land acknowledgements. So I want to set the stage here. I've got some background clips and information. And it's interesting, in the meantime, no sense is left. Free trade should have always been across Canada. Couldn't agree more. Good comment there from our audience. So we know that our vision for our country is just that. From the very beginning of this founding, we want a free and prosperous nation for everybody. We want to be, quote, strong and free as per our national anthem. But there's been the emergence, I don't know if you've noticed this, but it seems like in many places that you go, whether it's to a business, whether it's in media, whether it's in public events, there's a lot of land acknowledgements, and they come in different forms. So I wanted to share a little interesting with I think it was an insightful skit that I want to share with you. And I think it raises some interesting questions with a touch of humor.
Hello. Oh. Hello. First, I'd like to remind everyone here to turn off your cell phones. Before we begin this evening's performance, we would like to acknowledge that this theater stands on territory of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, and the Petun First Nations. We are also mindful of broken covenants and the need to make right with all our relations. And now, please enjoy the show.
Oh, sorry, hello? Sorry, excuse me, should we go?
Excuse me?
Oh, no, I just mean if we're on someone else's land, shouldn't we leave?
Oh, no. The theater is here now. We'd just like to acknowledge whose land it is.
I'm sorry, I'm so confused. So if we're on someone else's land, shouldn't we do something about that, or?
Hopefully we'll enjoy the performance.
Oh, okay, so some of the money from the ticket sales of the show are going to the Indigenous communities?
Well, no.
Oh, a portion of them?
No, the ticket sales go to the theater.
So is the money from the bottled water sold here going to the First Nations for clean drinking water, or?
Oh, no, that money goes to Nestle.
Nestle.
They're a sponsor.
I'm so sorry. I'm so confused. So whose land are we on? What are we doing?
It's a dialogue.
How are we making right?
Well, there's a plaque you can read in the lobby.
I don't understand.
I'm getting a message from the stage manager that we need to begin the show, so please take your seats.
But
have a good time.
But
Good night.
Guess I'll sit down. Enjoy the show. Just enjoy the show.
So there you go. There's an interesting humorous take, tongue-in-cheek, about this issue of Aboriginal land acknowledgements. And the next clip has to do with the variation of land acknowledgements out there.
We gather in celebration of the Oscars on the ancestral lands of the Tongva, Tataviam, and Chumash people.
Hi, everyone. Glad to be here with you in Ottawa on the traditional territory of the Algonquin people.
We would like to acknowledge that the land on which we gather is the territory of the Mohegan, Mashantucket Pequot, Eastern Pequot, Skatekok.
I would like to acknowledge that we are gathered on the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. This land acknowledgement is a recognition of shared history as a nation.
Wow. So as King Charles, the Crown, the representative of the Crown, uses the word unceded territory for Canada, we want to talk about Aboriginal land acknowledgements. We all agree that law is very important in our country, our tradition, property rights as well. Stability and peace are very important in our country. So we also believe justice is important. So we want to make sure that people are treated all fairly in this nation. So what does this mean? So with me here today, I have an incredible panel joining me to help peel the perennial onion on this issue. I have, first of all, Frances Widdowson. Frances joins me today. She's done extensive research on this. Welcome, Frances.
Thanks for having me on.
And Dr. Marco Navarro-Genie, who's Vice President at Frontier in Policy and Research Award. Welcome to you, Marco.
Good afternoon. Thank you.
And of course, the President of the Justice Center, John Carpay. Welcome, John.
Glad to be with you.
So it's going to be quite a discussion today. So I want to just ask all of you, beginning with Frances, what really is the purpose of Aboriginal land acknowledgements? Is there a simple answer to that from your perspective?
Yes, there is. And it is an Aboriginal industry-driven initiative, largely by the legal side, to get Canadians to admit that they are on land that is not theirs, and therefore rent must be paid to the landowners. And that's what it's all about.
So there you go. So we are truly settlers on Aboriginal land, and this is designed, in your opinion, to generate rent, money. It's a shakedown. Is that, I don't need me to put words in your mouth or what have you?
It is a shakedown. That is what it's about. And it's masked in a sort of a gloss of compassion that you're just showing that you care about Aboriginal people, but it will do nothing to assist the marginalized members of Aboriginal communities.
Okay. Marco, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think there is a way in which Canadians have been introduced with these things that might appeal to the reasonable citizen. And the reasonable citizen, I think, understands that there were Aboriginal people here before. And so they see it, or they might see it, as a sign of respect, the acknowledgement. And I would tend to agree, as long as it is voluntary. And this is one of the issues, I guess, that we're going to get into. How many of these land acknowledgements would be done if actually they were voluntary? And I'm going to leave that question mark there. But from the point of view of a reasonable citizen, and many of us might be, it could be a way to raise awareness about Aboriginal history. It could be a way to signal some kind of respect for the cultures that were here before. Some might say that is an issue of justice, to acknowledge that we share this space, and that there is some kind of a signal for coexistence. However, the devil is in the intentions. And as Frances notes, in many ways, some of the people who recite these things intend something quite differently. And they intend to send a signal, essentially, that we are all occupiers, in a way, of this land. That it signals that there is a significant amount of illegitimacy, not just in the communities that live here, but in the state itself, the country of Canada. And so it is in many ways a radically revolutionary statement.
Okay, wow. So there's some ambiguity here around these statements, but we need to ask ourselves and go deeper into this as to what they really mean. Is it about coexistence or something else? Wow. Okay, so John, what's your take on these Aboriginal land acknowledgements?
I'll mention 6 points very briefly. They are hypocritical virtue signaling by people who have no intention of giving away their own house for free or their own land for free to Aboriginals. Secondly, they do not help Aboriginals on reserves who are facing high rates of unemployment and poverty, alcoholism, suicides, all manner of social dysfunction. They don't help Aboriginals. They presuppose that the treaties did not cede land to the British Crown. Firstly, they presuppose that Aboriginals have got a different human nature, that prior to being contaminated by the arrival of the white man, that they lived without war and slavery and torture and all the other things that all people groups of all ethnicities have practiced on all continents for all of human history. And they indirectly promote race-based laws and policies known as apartheid in South Africa. We don't use that word here. And so that's a half dozen issues I've got with.
Wow, that is a lot. Gosh, you guys have unloaded a lot of issues there, and I'm sure some of in our audience, our heads are spinning with that one. So just to start off for a sec, John. So you said that if I heard you correctly, that this is empty virtuous signaling by people who support them, in the sense that they don't have any intention of giving up their own house. Like, is that what you're getting at? Like, it's hypocritical. Is that what you're getting at?
If I say, if I say, David, I just want to acknowledge that I owe you $2,000 that I cheated out of you in a business deal. I'm not going to repay you, but I just want to acknowledge that I owe you $2,000. It doesn't make any sense. If I actually owe you $2,000 because I've cheated you out of $2,000 in a business transaction, I need to repay it. I can't just spend the rest of my life acknowledging that I owe it to you. That's just hypocritical. And here we've got this, it's the unceded territories, as our king said in our parliament in the clip that you showed. Well, why don't all the non-Aboriginals, why don't we all pack up our bags and go back to Europe, Africa, Asia, if that's really true? And it's not true. But I'll stop there.
Okay, but if I can just push back a little bit, surely we want to be very respectful that, there were Aboriginals living in this continent. I mean, it's a complicated history. I've certainly had the privilege of studying ancient civilizations in North and South America. It's complicated. They moved around like all of human history, as you were alluding to, John. So isn't this a positive thing to acknowledge that people were here before us and we appreciate them as fellow Canadians now, and we're working shoulder to shoulder to build a great country? What's bad with that? Like, surely that's a good thing to acknowledge that history, because history matters, doesn't it? And we also did some really bad things. Our forebears, not me personally, but I'm saying forebears have not treated Aboriginals well. In other cases, they work together very well, but it's a mixed bag. So what do we do with that history?
Well, I think it's a very good thing to study history. I'm grateful for the fact that, and I went through the public education system in British Columbia, the grade 4 social studies curriculum, the entire year was devoted to studying Aboriginals. And we spent 1, 2, 3 months on the Aboriginals on the BC coast, and then the plains and different parts of Ontario. And it was just fascinating and enriching and very worthwhile to learn about how these people lived and how they survived so well in adverse conditions without the technology that we enjoy today. So it's a good thing to show respect. I would ask if that's what we want to do, and we want to have acknowledgements towards different people groups at the start of public meetings, then let's be even-handed about it, and let's acknowledge the tremendous sacrifices made by the Chinese immigrants to Canada building the railway, and let's make we had the Germans and the French and the British and the Dutch and on and on and on. We've got these different people groups, all of whom have made a valuable contribution to Canada, all of whom came at different times. And so, but I agree with your starting point. We should, it is good. I wish that everybody would learn more about Aboriginal culture and the way that they lived and their their hunting and their cooking and their religion, their ways of life, and so on and so forth. It's always good to acquire knowledge. But then, why only Aboriginals? Why not other ethnic groups getting recognition as well?
Okay, good point. So, Frances, yeah, we all agree that history matters, and you've certainly eloquently outlined your concerns that this is kind of a shakedown of sorts.
Mhm.
I guess my question though is are we being too cynical here? Is there anything valuable about these Aboriginal land acknowledgements, or is it like surely we know that there's a history of colonialism, good and bad, and yeah, now we're together as Canadians. Is there anything of value when it comes to these Aboriginal land acknowledgements?
No, there is nothing of value in the territorial land acknowledgements. And it's because they are pretending to be something that they're not. And what I find particularly disturbing is the divisiveness of these acknowledgements, which do not see Aboriginal people as part of the Canadian public. Like, to me, that's the key, is that everyone recognizes that, well, not everyone, but most people recognize that Aboriginal people deserve to be treated with dignity and have their needs satisfied.
Yes.
That's a huge problem. But territorial land acknowledgements do nothing to address that, which I think is what John was saying.
Yes.
And in fact, they support a position which actually marginalizes Aboriginal people further in Canadian society. So we should be thinking about how to assist people who are in need of various things, but that's not part of the territorial land acknowledgements. And I think it is very core, and that's another aspect which, even if it's voluntary, I don't think they're a good idea in terms of their philosophical orientation and how they're getting people to think about things, which is about Aboriginal people as a special group that deserve special things, which I don't think Aboriginal people are a special group. I think they're human beings just like everyone else who are entitled to the same dignity and respect and services. But the big problem, as we saw with the Catherine Cronus case, which John is very familiar with, is that they have a very coercive character, and people who don't go along with it are subject to all sorts of penalties. And that, to me, is the biggest issue surrounding territorial land acknowledgements.
All right, so that's a very interesting issue. Marco, any response from your end?
I think they do accomplish something, and that which they accomplish is something we may not like, but essentially is trying to indoctrinate a portion of the population, especially the young and children, to this idea that the state of Canada, and notice that I will keep saying state of Canada, not the nation, because that is a loaded word. That the state of Canada is illegitimate, that the rest of us here, whether we came a couple hundred years ago, whether we landed with Champlain or Maisonneuve or what have you, we are illegitimately here. And that we need to pay or will have to pay something. That payment, and John alluded to this, has not yet been spelled out, which is sort of the worst kind of sort of collecting a debt, is that you owe me, but I'll let you know what and how much. And I think the what and how much has yet to be spelled.
Okay, wow. So the wording or language matters in Aboriginal land acknowledgements. I've noticed quite a difference. I wanted to bring up an example that I found in a business. Madam Producer, if you could show that one slide here, and I want to read it to you because I think that language does matter. It says, the land and waterways that we stand on have been and continue to be the traditional, so that's one word, traditional, and unceded territory of the Sumas First Nation and Musqueam First Nation, and we are members of the Stolo Nation, who are members of that Stolo Nation, all the people who have settled on this land are tied together by a responsibility to live in good relations with the local First Peoples who continue to fight for their rights as sovereign nations. So there's some really, wow, it looks like some good language. We want to work in good relations with each other, but there's also assertions about fighting for sovereignty. So I'm not clear on exactly what this means, but I'm curious for your responses. But John, you're a lawyer. How do you look at this kind of language?
Actually, it ties in. I missed one of my 6 points in the opening. It presupposes that non-Aboriginals have no legitimate right to be here, and that has been alluded to by Dr. Widdowson as well. So the treaties recognize the reality that in the times when they were signed, the number treaties were in the years prior to and shortly after the year 1900. The number treaties that cover all of the prairies and I believe parts of Ontario and BC Northwest Territories as well. So they recognize the reality that the British and the French had come here and had set up their agriculture and industry and laws and courts and police force and military, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This was a reality. This was a reality in British Columbia as well, where no treaties were signed formally. But effectively, the British were in charge of British Columbia. It was British law that governed, that was applied to everybody. If you murdered somebody, whether you were Aboriginal or British or Japanese, Chinese, whatever, you would be charged and prosecuted, and if found guilty, you'd be hanged, because we had capital punishment in those days. So you had British law, British courts, you have the English and French languages. This was a reality, and so the treaties acknowledge the sovereignty of the Great White Mother, Queen Victoria. So she's called the Great White Mother in some of the treaties, and they formalized what was already a reality, that the British and the French prior to 1673, and then after the conquest, the British had occupied and were ruling the land that is today Canada. And the treaties formalized that. So to suggest that the land is unceded, as if somehow Aboriginal peoples still own these lands and everybody else is kind of a tenant, trespasser, has no right to be here, that's just not correct at law.
So in law, there is such a thing as crown ownership. Like our property rights system is supported by laws, and the practice is that the crown ultimately owns the land, period, and we can be still property owners, right? So I guess what I'm trying to get at is that property rights do matter in our tradition. I mean, if you don't have property rights, then how would anyone create any prosperity in this country? I mean, there'd be all this uncertainty that you wouldn't know what to do with. Like, there's no reason to have a civilization here in Canada. But so this is going almost like a different planet in terms of assumptions around law then. Is that right? Is there kind of like an emergence of, quote, Aboriginal law? Like I hear this in some universities where they're teaching the tradition of our common law, but there's other assertions of kind of Aboriginal law. Help us understand, John, what's going on here. It seems really confusing.
Well, by way of, I think this is a symptom of a broader, I would say, neo-Marxist narrative of group oppression and the woke ideology of equity, diversity, inclusion. Yeah. The idea being that society is a permanent state of war between men versus women, straight versus gay, lighter skinned people versus darker skinned people, and that there's always oppression between groups, and that the inherent worth and dignity of each individual matters a lot less than the group conflict. That's kind of the backdrop to it, and there are an awful lot of law professors who would disagree with me and say, "Oh no, the Aboriginals still kind of own Canada, and we have to take that into account." And law is interpreted differently by different people. My interpretation is that the treaties recognize the reality of British sovereignty, for better or for worse, right? You could still make the
Yeah.
argument that maybe it was a horrible thing that the British came here, but legally, the British were sovereign over this land. It was British law, British courts, British law enforced by British police, etc. And that's the reality. And yet the alternative interpretation would lead us to a point where we're going to be every passenger that's landing at the Vancouver International Airport or leaving from the International Vancouver Airport has got to pay a $10 rent charge to the Musqueam or other Aboriginal groups. If the British didn't really take over the territory, that's kind of the logical alternative is we should all be paying rent.
Okay, so that's kind of the assertion, is that when you get down to brass tacks, the British Crown, rightly or wrongly, conquered this part of the continent, period. Okay, so then, and that's the brutal reality of it. So before I turn to Frances and Marco for their response, I did want to share with you a very curious thing, because our Madam Producer put this through the AI program to ask the meaning of unceded. So please take this with a huge grain of salt, but we want to share this. Unceded means that Indigenous land was never legally surrendered or given to the Crown through treaty or other formal agreement. In the context of Canada, it signifies that First Nations people never formally signed away their traditional territories. So what do you think of that, Frances Widdowson? Is that to your point?
Well, I think that John has more legal expertise than me, but I think that the word sovereign. I'm a political scientist, and we study what sovereignty means, and Aboriginal groups are not sovereign because they do not have the highest authority with which to protect their territorial boundaries, which is what we're talking when we talk about sovereignty. So all these kinds of ideas are invented by lawyers to form the basis of further disputes. And so the question people have to ask is, what are we trying to do here? Are we trying to divert all sorts of public funds to legal disputes that are never going to end? The BC Treaty process in British Columbia has been going on since 1991, and they have settled, supposedly, and they're probably not even settled those 8 that they've done. And we've got to spend another 50 years going on in these legal disputes. And all that funding is going to this huge apparatus that does nothing to address Aboriginal circumstances. And we just heard, I just saw an article today about how, I believe it's $32 billion is now going into the Aboriginal policy area, and the conditions are not improving at all. When are we going to realize that the current diversion of funds to the Aboriginal industry, largely lawyers and consultants, but also neo-tribal elites, is going to do nothing to address the problems that we're pretending to solve with all of these symbolic gestures?
Oh, for Pete's sake. So that's what you mean by the quote Aboriginal industry then, Frances? Like,
Yes.
I know you've written about this extensively and analyzed it. Is we're
Yes.
kind of being duped in terms of an industry that wants to fight. They want to create, like, instead of dealing with the real issues of water, poverty, economic development, prosperity, the list goes on.
Yes.
They want to divert you to a fight that will take them through the law courts forever, and they'll make millions. Gosh.
Yes, billions. They make
kind of
billions.
quite a picture.
And the most serious issue, which is not discussed very much, is the high rates of fetal alcohol syndrome, which exist in these marginalized
Horrible.
Aboriginal communities.
Yeah, horrible. Yeah.
This is a state of emergency situation, and nothing is being done about this. And instead, we're worrying about all these made up problems that lawyers have constructed so that they can pursue these disputes endlessly.
Okay, but if a First Nation, in all due respect, has kind of an adjustment they want to make on the boundaries of their territory, that's one thing. But we're talking about a wholesale throwing up over the apple cart of basically who's sovereign over the land, which is basically retreading the history of the crown's sovereignty and the conquering of Canada by the British. Am I simplifying this too much?
Well, the Aboriginal groups are claiming that they're sovereign nations. How are they sovereign nations? How do they have the final authority over what it is that they do? Many of these groups are 500 to 1,000 people with no economic base, no institutions, no ability to actually protect their boundaries, not recognized in the international state system. So it's just made up language by lawyers so that it can provide justification for further disputes about how they should have various rents paid because of the claim of sovereignty, which has never been substantiated in any meaningful way.
Okay, wow. Marco, you're a political scientist as well. What's your thoughts on this discussion?
Well, let me jump back to something that I mentioned earlier about the nature of these claims being revolutionary. And by revolutionary, I mean that it is an attempt to transform the nature of social and political reality. It's not just a reform, but sort of standing things on their head. And at issue here, is the word that Frances has put her finger on, the word nation. Nation. The word nation is a European concept. It arises in the Middle Ages and in the system of universities when people from different languages in Europe came to places like Oxford or Sorbonne. And so the Scots were considered an ethnic group, or the Czechs were considered an ethnic group, and they were referred to as nations, meaning people who come from a place where they were born. At essence, in the word nation is the idea of being born, and so nations have never been sovereign. Anyone looking up on Google or what have you will find out that there are in excess of 5,000 different ethnic groups that have distinctive identity on the globe. So if nations are sovereign, and this is the linchpin of the issue, then each one of these 5,000 ethnic or identities deserve to have their own state, because in law, only states are sovereign. So when you introduce this idea that nations are sovereign, in Canada, we have in excess of 600 different nations, some of which are Aboriginal. The Métis are recognized as a nation. The Acadians are recognized as a nation. The Quebecois are recognized as a nation. So each one of these groups in Canada alone is a sovereign nation. That means that inside this country that we call Canada, which in legal terms is a state, there are essentially over 600 different countries with their own claims to sovereignty, their own laws, their own systems of government, and whatever. That is a recipe for chaos. That is exactly what is revolutionary about these claims.
Oh my! So that's quite an analysis, Marco, that you've given us. Is that we're kind of on a road to disintegrating as a nation if we kind of follow down.
But we're not a nation. We're not a nation. Canada is not a nation. Canada is a country. Canada is a state. And in a legal form and in political science terms, Canada is a multinational state. It is, in other words, a singular legal entity that has all these varieties of ethnicities and groups with a claim to distinctiveness. Those are these nations.
Okay, wow. So this is quite a discussion. I know it's a little bit confusing. It's hard to understand some of these things, but John, I want to turn to you because I look at this and I say, well, if we know that the Crown does have title ultimately to property here, and as a country, there is sovereignty at a national level. I guess my question is, how do we deal with this situation? Because it seems like there's parties that have a kind of a special interest. There's special interest groups that are pushing this kind of divisive, hate-filled perspective, in my opinion, that really will undermine the ability of Canada as a country to move forward. If we are not in unity under a flag, we're going to go in all kinds of directions. I don't know, like this is kind of like a recipe for becoming a developed nation where our poverty just continues to decline. We already know that Canada is stagnating in terms of our incomes. I mean, I look at the differential between Canada and the United States. It's stunning as an example. What do we need to do to rebuild this country, given this kind of dynamic? Any advice, sir?
Well, I won't get into the economic policies, which is not our topic today and not my area of expertise. But I mean, to rebuild Canada, we need some better economic policies for sure. But in relation to land acknowledgements, look, throughout history, different people groups have conquered other people groups, and that's happened at a very small local level, as between different tribes. It's happened city-states, and it's happened at the level of nation states or states, countries. And so whenever there's been a war or even a single battle, and there's a victor and there's the defeated party, the victor basically has, as far as I can tell, four options. One, they can commit a genocide and kill all the people that they've just defeated in a war. That's one option. The other one is to enslave them and say, you lost the war, so you're going to be slaves for the rest of your life. The third one is to let them continue to live, but as second-class citizens, and say, well, we're not going to kill you, we're not going to enslave you, but you don't have the same rights as everybody else. The fourth one is to say, we won the war, but we're not going to kill you, we're not going to enslave you, and we're not going to make you second-class citizens, but you are free to be equal citizens with those of us who have conquered. So those are kind of the four things that have been practiced. In Canada, our history is a little bit of the third and a little bit of, and mostly the fourth. So we have had legislative discrimination against Aboriginals. They couldn't vote until I think it was around 1960 when the Diefenbaker changed that law. But off reserve, the Indians were able to work and live and pay taxes, etc., just like everybody else. So those are kind of the four options I see. What's being advocated by some law professors and various individuals, academics, is kind of this fifth notion that somehow the British didn't win the war, and somehow Aboriginals should still kind of have superior rights to people who are not Aboriginals. That's a recipe for disaster. It's just divisive. Why somebody in 2025 should have different hunting or fishing rights, that's beyond me. A good friend of mine is 1/32 Aboriginal. He's got better access to legal hunting and legal fishing than what I do. I don't even hunt or fish, but it bothers me on principle that somebody who's got a slightly different bloodline has different legal rights. That's what Canada denounced for decades. The apartheid in South Africa was race-based laws. The whole country, the whole legal system, it all mattered very much. Are you legally white? Are you black? Are you colored, which was mixed race? Are you East Indian? I don't know if they had more than those four categories, but it did not work out well. And Canada denounced it and said, look, you got to have one law for everybody, regardless of ancestry. And I think that's the best way to go.
Wow. So these Aboriginal land acknowledgements, then you have to look at the wording, but they're not just simply symbolic. They have great meaning in terms of the significance of this country. It's interesting, a comment from the audience, Kenzie Kraken says, we have two-tier citizenship with Aboriginals having more and special rights. Is that a fair comment, Frances?
Definitely. And I believe the term was Citizens Plus that was coined in the Hawthorne Report. And then Alan Cairns, the great political scientist, wrote a book trying to justify that situation. And I thought Alan was a wonderful man, and I really appreciated many things that he had to say. But I think he was wrong on that one, because I don't think it's addressing the legal side, which is what this is all about, because that is the driver of all of these policies, is the lawyers.
Okay.
It does not address the social and economic problems. And that is the key to trying to address Aboriginal deprivation. And the more we start to focus on the legal disputes and all these claims and the rights and so on, it's going to do nothing to provide the educational services that are needed to help Aboriginal people understand the world, become educated, receive proper health care, and be able to enter into the workforce, which is for almost all Canadians, for the large majority of Canadians. That's how we have a meaningful existence, is by what we can contribute in terms of our labor. And if you're living in an isolated community, which has no economic base, you are going to sense that your life doesn't matter. And that's why we have all these terrible social conditions that exist in Aboriginal communities. It doesn't matter how many rights these Aboriginal legal rights, or if they have more legal rights, that won't do anything. So we're getting our attention diverted into all of these conflicts, because that is what benefits the drivers of Aboriginal policy. And follow the money. That's all people need to do, is follow where this money is going. And it is not going to assist the most deprived members of the Aboriginal population.
Right on. So follow the money, pay attention here. And I think, I think you're really challenging us, Frances, to think. I mean, all of you are on this great panel. We're talking about Aboriginal land acknowledgements. We appreciate the comments from our audience. And so, Frances, just picking up on that thought, it's very interesting. I know that a couple years ago, the province of New Brunswick gave directives across their institutions saying there should be no Aboriginal land acknowledged because there's legal implications. Can you help explain that to us, or perhaps John could weigh in on that as well, or Marco?
Yeah, well, that is, they understood at that time. So everyone just initially was sold the idea that it was just a symbolic kind of idea, and it really didn't matter. But this is going to be used by Aboriginal industry lawyers in all the legal disputes. People have admitted that the land doesn't belong to them. And the more that is done in official government channels, like if the local knitting club does a land acknowledgement, that's not going to matter. But if you have all your government employees putting land acknowledgements on their emails, that is governmental entities that are making this declaration. So that is going to have serious consequences. And that is what the strategy was from the beginning by these lawyers.
Is that a fair comment, John?
I think it is. I mean, on a short-term basis, if a school board or the provincial legislature has acknowledgement, reads out a land acknowledgement, on a short-term basis, it does nothing, it achieves nothing. But over time, if you have, this gets to the indoctrination part of it, if you've persuaded 50, 60, 70, 80, 90% of Canadians that we really don't have a right to be here and that non-Aboriginals really should be second-class citizens, if that's what the population believes, then you're far more likely to have policies that reflect that. And even judges are not at all immune from public opinion. I mean, we saw that during the lockdowns when majority of Canadians were supportive of these measures, and that notion trickled its way up into the courts, where the judges often wrote the media narrative into their court rulings, even though that media narrative was not supported by evidence that was placed before the court. The other small point I want to raise that I don't think has been touched upon yet is the legality or illegality of imposing a religious or political or ideological statement on a group of people. 30, 40 years ago, it was customary in every public school in Canada. The children at the beginning of class would stand up and recite the Our Father, and this practice was eventually disbanded. And part of the reason was that the children of atheist and Jewish parents said, this is not fair. Our kids are not Christian, and they're being forced to, stand up and recite the Our Father. And the initial response was, well, then they could just leave the class, and we're not going to force them to participate. And then it was said, well, that's not good enough, because then those kids stand out. They have to kind of ostracize themselves and get up and walk out and declare themselves to be non-Christian or not the children of Christian parents or whatever. So that was phased out. And there's an interesting Supreme Court of Canada ruling from about 10 years ago. City of Saguenay had a Roman Catholic mayor who always opened city council meetings with a prayer, a Roman Catholic prayer, and he made the sign of the cross and whatever. This was challenged by, I think it was a Mouvement Laïque Québécois or something like that, the Quebec secular movement. The Supreme Court of Canada sided against the city of Saguenay and said the mayor did not have a right to read a prayer at a public meeting because it amounted to the imposition of religion on the non-Catholics that would have been present. I would argue the point that the same should apply to land acknowledgements insofar as if you have a public meeting. Now, land acknowledgement is not a prayer. You could debate whether it's spiritual or not, but certainly it's not a prayer, but it is an ideological political statement. And it's a type of statement that I would defend to the death the right of anybody to declare that. If you want to declare unceded territory, this and that, I'll go to bat. If the government tries to shut you up and censor you, I'll go to bat for your free speech rights. You can say whatever you want. But in a public meeting of a city council or a school board, when you read out something like that, the same logic that applies to prayers should also apply to ideological, divisive political statements.
Okay, there you have it. Wow, it sounds like, Marco, are we adopting in this country a kind of a secular religion? I don't know how else to say it, where there's a kind of a set of language and customs and practices that are taking the place of what, John mentioned earlier, was kind of a Christian religious practice that happened at public institutions, and now it's switched to this kind of woke religion. Is that a fair comment, Marco?
Sure. And it's actually it goes beyond land acknowledgements. In many public institutions, some universities and some public schools, for example, people have seen this new practice that either prior to the land acknowledgement or following the land acknowledgement, there is some kind of Aboriginal spiritual ceremony, sweet grass and things like this, which, by the way, to John's point, if anybody in the staff, say, of that particular institution got up and left the room, they would be singling themselves out as now not part of that particular orthodoxy. And this has happened, where essentially they would put a big bullseye on their chest. And
so they could lose their job because they don't agree with that.
I don't think anybody has openly yet lost a job because of that, but there is the fear and the suspicion that you'll be marked in some ways because you are not part of the Aboriginal orthodoxy. And this is a serious problem because, of course, is essentially a compelled kind of speech, and is a compelled presence before a particular ceremony with which you do not agree. Now, what is also kind of egregious about this, and we sort of touched on this tangentially earlier, is that the compulsion of these land acknowledgements come out of the Truth and Reconciliation. And so it's an imposition of what is perceived to be a truth which of course is not. Because there is all this indoctrination and all this baggage that comes from underneath and right behind it, right? And so it's meant to perpetuate this idea that, again, the state of Canada is illegitimate. It's meant to perpetuate this idea that the Aboriginals here lived in perpetual peace, that, you know, the big bad Europeans came and sowed discord and hatred among them, and et cetera, et cetera. So it is one of the things that is the furthest from the truth to assert and force people to assert these land acknowledgements.
Okay, very interesting. So, Marco, I just want to put this into perspective a little bit because I'm really intrigued about this as a cultural phenomenon in the sense that my sense is, based on the data, that there's Aboriginal land acknowledgements in Canada, to some degree in the United States, but internationally, and I know you're of Nicaraguan background and actually have Aboriginal ancestry as well. Is this a North American phenomenon? Do other countries have these kinds of land acknowledgements as well?
It is beginning to pop up. A lot of the things that happen in places like Canada, in the United States, get noticed and seen elsewhere through networks of Aboriginal associations and what have you. And so these days, you might go to places like Bolivia, for example, or some communities in Peru, some communities in Guatemala and southern Mexico, who are starting to promote this idea that the current state, the sovereign under which they live, is illegitimate. Colonization, decolonization, and all this movement is beginning to get wings in the rest of the Americas, in maybe not throughout, but in certain spots in the rest of the Americas. And so I would venture to guess that is probably going to propagate to other places as well.
So if this kind of level of acknowledgements, Francis, tends to be in North America, can you help us understand again the origins of why this is happening? I think you've, in a very compelling way, outlined the challenges of the Aboriginal industry, those that frankly, are feeding off of this. They make a lot of money off this kind of divisive legal challenges. I guess my question is, where is it coming from ideologically?
It's coming from what we've talked about earlier, which is what's called the woke position, which is not meant to be a pejorative. It's identity politics that has become totalitarian, which means, and this came out of the 1960s. It's got roots in Herbert Marcuse's ideas of giving up on the working class and saying it's the non-class identities that are going to be the key to the revolution. And then we have George Fredrickson, who is in the public administration literature, which is the way to have capitalism work more smoothly, is to give proportionate representation to underrepresented groups and what's called the professional managerial class. So if you have 7% of the population that's Aboriginal, you should have 7% of the lawyers and the bureaucrats and so on be Aboriginal. And what this equity, diversity, and inclusion position argues that in order to increase the numbers of these marginalized groups, you need to make them feel that they belong within those institutions. And making them feel that they belong is about affirming beliefs as being true, even if those beliefs are not true. So if an Aboriginal group is claiming to be sovereign and has lived on these lands from time immemorial, and that's the other thing about territorial land acknowledgements, is that they're often highly inaccurate and do not recognize the movements of Aboriginal peoples across the country that happened because of the introduction of the fur trade and the weapons and everything that happened. You're supposed to affirm these beliefs, even if you don't believe that they're true, because that is going to make the Aboriginal representatives feel that they are recognized and acknowledged and their identities are affirmed. So it's that mentality, and that's where the totalitarianism comes in, is that if you do not affirm what Aboriginal groups, the representatives of Aboriginal groups, believe to be true, you will suffer punishments. And this is on the table. And this is very, very dangerous, because you should not be getting anyone to make assertions that they do not believe to be true. And that is what's happening with these territorial land acknowledgements.
Wow. So, John, you're a lawyer. You're the president of the Justice Center. What's your response to that? And there's talk about bringing back federally the Online Harms Act and naming this hateful speech. I mean, heck, we could all be arrested for this conversation today, John. Are you concerned about that?
There are people in Canada right now who, if it was within their power to do so, they would see all four of us locked up in jail, or at least, punished in some fashion, if not prison time. This ideological coercion that Dr. Widdowson was just speaking about, real life case. One of the Justice Center's cases right now, we're representing two school teachers in Ontario, Matt and Nicole Alexander, and they were fired for not embracing. This is Catherine Cronus, who is that's another one of our court cases. She objected to a land acknowledgement, but I'm talking about two teachers who were fired for their jobs, essentially for not affirming and celebrating the rainbow flag. And this is totalitarianism, where yes, and I apologize. It's off topic from land acknowledgement, but it's on topic insofar as, it was mentioned, it's very difficult. If you object, you're painting a target on your back. If a teacher in a school objected to land acknowledgement, they better have a good employment lawyer standing on the sidelines, ready to come to assistance. Unfortunately, they're required to be represented by a union, so they can't choose their own lawyer, but that's a whole other topic. But in any event, here's my point. My point is, Matt and Nicole Alexander were fired not because they mistreated a student, not because they were unkind to a transgender or same-sex attracted student, not because anything was wrong with their teaching performance in the classroom. They both had stellar employment records, stellar performance reviews. But the Nicole had showed up to her kindergarten class one day, and there was a rainbow pride poster that somebody else had affixed to her door. She took it down, put it in a cupboard, and proceeded to teach class, and was then essentially fired over that act. She was initially suspended, investigation, blah, blah, blah. At the end of the day, both teachers were fired, not for anything they did in the classroom, but simply because they would not openly affirm and celebrate the rainbow flag and the ideology for which that flag stands. So that is totalitarianism.
Wow.
And that's what we're up against in Canada today. Whether it pertains to land acknowledgements or LGBTQ issues, there is that serious threat to our freedom by people who will, when it's within their power, they will force you to say something that you don't believe to be true. And that's totalitarian.
Wow. This is stunning. So this is just not symbolic. This is a powerful case study of the use of power to compel you to speak a certain way, behave a certain way. So then you can say, not only is it about kissing goodbye, potentially your property rights, but your freedom to talk, your freedom of discussion. I mean, am I being histrionic here, Marco? Is that how you're seeing this?
Not at all. John is correct in sort of trying to put a wider perspective on this, which is the totalitarian aspect of it. There are several different strands to this, and archaeologists of ideas will spend years working on this. But it is very clear that this is issued in large part out of the decolonization ideology and movement, which is essentially sort of either sprinkled in some ways or steeped deeply into some kind of Marxist totalitarian ideology, mixed with postmodernism and all kinds of things. But this is happening on a regular basis. I happen to know, for example, of a story of a local college in Calgary, where the faculty were invited by the higher ups to write their own land acknowledgements, right?
Pardon
And then
me?
they would come to this faculty meeting and read their own land acknowledgements. This is right out of George Orwell, by the way, right? If anybody has read 1984, but the idea
Bizarre.
is that you must come and perform, the ritual, writing it in your own words. And of course, if you refuse, again, you got a bullseye painted right on your chest, right? But make no mistake about it, right? The roots of this is some kind of modernized Marxism.
Wow. And so these are taxpayer-funded institutions. Is that right? Universities, colleges,
That's
among
right.
many others. And we're paying for this to have people on faculty get down on their knees and recite some type of land acknowledgement? That's insane.
Well, Marco
let's
didn't
not-
say they had to be on their knees.
No,
Okay,
let's
he
not
didn't
forget.
have to be on their knees.
And let's not forget, by the way, that these same faculty members are also taxpayers, so they are too paying for it.
This is, wow, I had no idea. It's amazing what you learn on Leaders on the Frontier. So I'm having this discussion with our dynamic panel of John Carpay, Dr. Marco Navarro-Genie, Dr. Frances Widdowson, about the whole issue of Aboriginal land acknowledgements. And I so much appreciate the comments from our audience. Please like what we're talking about. Share it. I don't think you can listen to this and not come to the conclusion, in my humble opinion, that this is a very important issue. Because I would say, and I'm going to come back to you, Frances, when it comes to this discussion, does this not indicate the kind of path or choice that we have as a nation to go down? Are we going to continue to be a country unified under one flag with those kind of common values and beliefs that enable us to have freedom and prosperity and live in peace? Or do we actually risk going down the path of being a bunch of siloed nations vying for all kinds of rights and privileges? And frankly, I'm concerned that this is, and honestly, I want to be careful what I say here, but I'm a student of history, and I look at this and I think, if you create a two-tiered set of citizens and you create special privileges, that's the recipe for serious conflict, if not violence, isn't it? This is all the marbles.
Yeah, well, and it's getting worse because we have the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People that has been, because of the Kamloops, the false claim that was made about the remains of 215 children being found, the country got thrown into hysteria, and therefore it was pushed through. That was pushed through in federal legislation and softened up things in British Columbia for this to be brought through. And the territorial land acknowledgements is a similar kind of maneuver, because what it's doing is it's kind of rejecting the geographic principle. So our country, the provinces and the municipalities and the country are based on a geographical principle, which means you live in Canada. That's your political system. You live in a municipality you vote for people in that municipality. If you move to another municipality, you vote for other people, and that's understood. Same with the provinces. And what the territorial land acknowledgements are trying to encourage, the thought process, is that they want to bring in an ethnic principle. So it's a principle based on ancestry, as opposed to a geographical one where it doesn't matter what your ancestry is, because you are just living in this space. And what that ethnic principle is going to be grafted onto the geographical principle, and that's going to create unfairness between those that belong to the ethnic group and those that don't. And those that don't belong to the ethnic group are going to have no way of holding the politicians within that ethnic group accountable through voting or throwing them out of office. And so that ethnic principle, which is being brought in, symbolically initially through the territorial land acknowledgements, but also through the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, is not going to sit easily with liberal democratic geographical principles. And it is going to result in increasing conflicts between those that belong to the ethnic group and those that don't. And no better is this seen than in the municipality of Powell River, where there is all sorts of pushes to have all these ethnic principles grafted onto that town, and has caused unbelievable conflicts between neighbors over this, which never existed before, which were all driven by these kinds of maneuvers that are, at the root, Aboriginal industry inspired initiatives. And that's important to keep on stressing, because this really doesn't have anything to do with ordinary Aboriginal people. Like, they're not the ones that are driving this. It is the privileged members of these ethnic groups and their associated lawyers and consultants that are behind it.
Okay.
And that's what should really be the target of the criticisms that are going to be made about these various policy areas.
Wow. What are your thoughts, John?
It's a brilliant analysis by Dr. Widdowson, and it alludes, I'm probably repeating myself, but if you want a country to prosper, then everybody should have the same legal rights, regardless of race, ancestry, ethnicity. Anything else is a recipe for disaster. When the treaties were signed, so reserves were given to Aboriginals as part of those treaties, and they are relatively small. And if you look at the landmass of Canada, what percentage of Canada is a designated Aboriginal reserve. But outside of that, the number of treaties on the prairies talked about everybody recognizing the sovereignty of the Great White Mother, who was Queen Victoria, and that her laws would apply, her laws would prevail. And what has not always been practiced perfectly, but the intention was there, that the law applies equally to all, right? Yeah. So if you commit a crime, whether it's shoplifting or murder, you get prosecuted the same way, regardless of your race. Or if you are in court on a breach of contract, the court's not supposed to look at your race or ethnicity. And so in this, that's how you have the potential for success in a country where people have the freedom to celebrate and affirm their own culture, right? But that need not create strife. If I want to celebrate my cultural and ethnic heritage, and if everybody celebrates that, okay, that's an exercise of freedom of expression. But it's very different when you say the law of the land is going to be different based on your ancestry, race, ethnicity, or descent. And so we have to reject that and celebrate all cultures, including the Aboriginal cultures. Celebrate those cultures and learn from them and appreciate them, but under one law that applies equally for all.
Indeed. I did want to share with you a fascinating example that we've come across here, and that relates to in the city of Winnipeg, where there is a very interesting set of processes or steps that are required. And if I understand them correctly, and I don't want to misrepresent them, but here is a neighborhood park. It's a lovely park for children and adults, their parents, whomever. And on it is actually not just a plaque. It says Winnipeg is located in Treaty 1 territory, the home and traditional lands of the Anishinaabe. And I'm sorry, I can't read it entirely, but the point is that there's a land acknowledgement. And what strikes me is not just simply the fact that that acknowledgement exists at a park, of all things, like they're labeling everything. But also the process was that as the neighborhood came together apparently to create this park, they had to research the background of, quote, ownership of the land to be able to confirm that there were no claims on it. And honestly, I defer to others for the more details regarding that process. But Marco, do you find that fascinating that there's even an Aboriginal land acknowledgement, the cost, the time, the money to again put some type of plaque on there? pretend to know what the costs are, but I suspect it's not trivial. But again, it's not doing anything for Aboriginal people, let alone anyone in the citizen, except to create a plaque that everybody looks at and says, well, gosh, I guess we're leaving on stolen land here. What are your thoughts, Marco?
Yeah, I'm not all surprised. I think we have talked about the desire to indoctrinate. And people who are consciously aware that indoctrination is a tool usually tend to want to apply it to children from the start. What is kind of shocking is that we have essentially renounced the idea on which, and one of the main ideas on which this country rests. John was talking about this, but I'm reminded because recently we were talking about him and celebrating the anniversary of his birth. Thomas D'Arcy McGee, the first Canadian to be the first political assassination in this country since the founding of Canada, and he was assassinated by radical groups who were peddling essentially identity politics. And D'Arcy McGee resisted this notion that any kind of privileges or advantages should be based on religion or ethnic identity or political ideas or what have you, right? So going back to the point that John was making, that the rule of law applies to everyone equally, and that it is the only way in which some of the most prosperous and most decent countries in the world have been built on this idea. If you look at the countries that have been built on the exact opposite idea, eventually they descend into civil war and murder and mayhem and disaster.
Wow. Well, on that note, I wanted to share with you a clip from the RCMP, no less. And this, I want to just set the context because this is very heart-wrenching, I believe. The context was in Nova Scotia where there, I believe, 2 children tragically missing. So you can imagine the community, let alone the parents, are looking at answers to this. And they began with this.
First, I acknowledge that we are in Mi'kma'ki, the traditional and unceded ancestral territory of the Mi'kmaq people. I also recognize that African Nova Scotians are a distinct people whose histories, legacies, and contributions have enriched that part of Mi'kma'ki known as Nova Scotia for over 400 years.
So there you have it, John. We've got not only the land acknowledgement, but we are adding in some type of African history of Canadians who've been there. What's going on here, John? The RCMP, this is the institution that was set up to protect Aboriginal people. They didn't do a perfect job, but they sure did do a heck of a job. And meanwhile, you've got the spokesperson on behalf of the RCMP weighing in on this. What is going on?
Look, I think it's a call to action to citizens to use their charter protected freedom of expression and speak up about it. You know, the police are going to be less likely to do that in future if people peacefully, 100% against violence, but you use your tongue peacefully. If a lot of people in Nova Scotia phoned and emailed the RCMP saying this is really offensive, you've got a real life job for the police to do, and they're making an announcement about a tragedy. We don't need the politics prefacing that, and it's offensive, and I object to it. You know, choose your own words, right? But to speak out against that is what turns it around. Like, and this lady Catherine Cronus in Ancaster, Ontario,
yes,
who spoke out. You know, that's the catalyst for change. People have to say, I object to this divisive, controversial, political statement being imposed on everybody at this meeting. I object. And
I object.
You know, people, a lot of people, including people pushing for Aboriginal land acknowledgements, a lot of people are conflict adverse. And when they hear this pushback, when people say, well, I object, this is not fair, this is not right, this is not true, I disagree with it, you get a bunch of people speaking up. And I've seen this over and over again. The totalitarian bullies just fade away and wither into the background. Not all of them, but many of them. They don't want conflict. of
Right,
any kind,
exactly.
right? So if citizens simply speak up and let their views be known and politely say, I object to this, it's political, divisive, controversial, it's inappropriate, we shouldn't be doing this. If people say that, and I know it takes a lot of courage because it's contrary to the whatever personality type that most people have, right? We want to be conciliatory. Sure. The four of us on this panel are not representative of the Canadian population. We're probably less shy about speaking our minds. But it's up to ordinary, regular, everyday Canadians to use their vocal cords and to speak out against this stuff. And that's when it's going to hold it at abeyance and start to push it back. You got to exercise your free speech.
I think you're right. We got to exercise our free speech. A bit of courage is the time. Timothy Jones says, totally object, as it had nothing to do with the story at hand. Yeah, so let's get the RCMP back to work on finding the bad guys instead of doing the political sermonizing. So speaking of where Canadians are at, there's some interesting polls out there, just for the record. A majority of Canadians reject the idea, according to a Leis poll that I've come across, that they live on stolen Indigenous land. And the older people are, the more likely they are to say they don't, according to this poll. It's interesting, among all respondents across Canada, 52% say they did not live on stolen Indigenous land, with 27% saying that they do. The remaining 21% said that they don't know or declined to answer. So, golly, it sounds like we need a lot of discussion. And I think in terms of discussion, I guess one of the things that strikes me, if you look at kind of a 360-degree view of this issue, is frankly, what are the implications of these land acknowledgements? I look at this and I would say, as an investor, as a business, why in your right mind, Frances, would you invest in a country where we don't even know what's up or down in terms of who owns the land? Isn't that a recipe for poverty, Frances?
Yeah, I think it doesn't make any sense on any level. We got hoodwinked into doing this because we were, and this is what wokeism does, is it uses compassion to impose its totalitarian agenda. So people were sold this on the basis that this was a compassionate thing to do, when that's not what it was about. And therefore, you know, we're going to now have to spend a lot of time and effort trying to get this rolled back. And I think that what Catherine Cronus did, I take my hat off to her, because I know that was not an easy thing for her to do. And it was at great cost. But what she did was very respectful, was not disrupting anything, but just let it be known. And there's something in psychology called, I believe it's called the false consensus effect, whereby people think that there's a consensus on something, and they tend to believe that people hold the same beliefs that other people do. And the only way you can break that is to let it be known publicly that you don't agree with this. And, you know, courage begets courage, cowardice begets cowardice. And we need people to find courage now, because we don't, you know, we are not in a very good position now as a country in terms of especially freedom of speech. And if people don't start standing up and letting it be known that they disagree with these totalitarian tactics, which are not rooted in compassion at all, compassion is being used for a particular purpose, we will lose the liberal democratic freedoms that we have come to take for granted for so long in this country.
Oh, that's a very powerful summary. So as we wrap up this incredible discussion, and I want to thank our panel for it and our audience, this has been really quite a remarkable discussion that I dare to say you don't hear very often, which is also a sad statement, quite frankly, of the state of affairs of our country. But how should we go forward? If we think of transformative policy to get us back on track, and I'll just give you one example. Why do we still have this Indian Act? Why don't we get rid of it and enable all peoples, including our brothers and sisters of Aboriginal background to be free and prosper like the rest of us. Marco?
Well, I think we'd have to go back to courage. There is no political courage to do this because the people who benefit most from the Indian Act are well entrenched and are the people who often have the microphone and will essentially complain that people who want to dismantle the Indian Act are racist, and people who want to keep the Indian Act are racist. It doesn't matter which way you look at it, is racist. The reality is that it is a kind of misguided compassion, as Frances was pointing out, but it's worse than that in the sense that it pushes a certain kind of victimhood, right? It is the condescension that the Aboriginal peoples of this country were victimized, have been victimized, but continue to be victims. And, that's not a place of courage, and that's not a place of equality. It's also disrespectful to the great warriors of their culture and to the wiser people who governed them when the white man got here. Chiefs like Crawford, for example, and many others who were legitimately considered by the white men good rulers and wise people. We now have essentially thrown them into this pit in which they were victims and in which they were children. So we have essentially infantilized these wiser people and these brave people. So I think we need to push back against that. Courage is the first place, and the courage to speak, as John pointed out, probably is the first one.
Well said. John, any closing comments?
My favorite quote, the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. So, in the long run, truth vanquishes the lie, and freedom eventually prevails over tyranny, and justice will inevitably crush injustice. And it's our responsibility in the interim to be working hard and practicing the virtues of courage and perseverance.
Well said. Dr. Widdowson, any closing comment on your part?
Yes, we need to focus on the actual problems. I don't really think the Indian Act is the absence or presence of it. It really doesn't matter in terms of the marginalized members of Aboriginal communities. What's needed is to seriously address the terrible conditions in those communities, and that has to do with terrible circumstances in unviable areas, and that is a massive problem that we are not really able to think through very well, because we tend to get diverted into talking about all sorts of legal types of initiatives. So instead of funding all these legal disputes, I am arguing for a defunding of the Aboriginal industry and a serious strategy to deal with the terrible social conditions that exist in these marginalized Aboriginal communities.
Well said. I want to thank our panelists today, Dr. Marco Navarro-Genie, John Carpay, and of course, Dr. Frances Widdowson. This has been a very insightful conversation, a heartfelt one as well. And of course, to our audience, your comments are much appreciated. And please share this and spread the word. These are important issues, as you can see, for not just simply the few, but for the many, as we try to build this country called Canada. So on that note, thanks again, and I hope you have a terrific week.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for watching Leaders on the Frontier. We're a nonpartisan think tank. We explore ideas, policy, and practical solutions that can make a difference in the lives of Canadians. We do not accept any government funding. We work for you. Thank you for supporting Frontier. Visit fcpp.org to give. While you're there, be sure to check out our latest articles and research. Without open discussion and debate, you're not thinking, nor are you free. Comment below. We'd love for you to join the conversation.